I wish we hadn't had that safety car because their strategy was coming together really well.
Where's Toto? I had a meeting with him. I don't know. I haven't seen him for a while. Toto's like in a cup.
They just got it perfectly right for Oscar, and Oscar got it perfectly right for himself. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the F1 show, brought to you by Audi after an eventful Bahrain Grand Prix that has brought us so much to talk about in today's program. It was a masterful, calm display, wasn't it, by Oscar Piastri to pick up his fourth win. Lando Norris beating himself up after qualifying and then coming back to recover somewhat in the race. And then where are Max Verstappen and Red Bull now? There are some rumors of a crisis meeting afterwards. We'll discuss that. And also the Ferraris, Lewis Hamilton turning around 9th in qualifying to 5th in the race, but still some way distant from the Australian. Joining me to discuss all this and much, much more, answer a few fans' questions as well, Bernadette Collins, who's been watching it from the comfort of her own living room, and Ted Kravitz, who, like myself, returned yesterday after a couple of weeks away. Had a very pleasant stay in Japan, nice time in Tokyo, and then into the desert. Ted, let's start with you. Obviously, we were out there and we witnessed I think Martin Brundle described it as a kind of Prost-esque drive by Oscar Piastri, and a kind of flat line in terms of how calm he is. He's really grown into it this year, and another really, really competent display.
Yes, hello Simon, hello Bernie, hello everybody. Oh, Bernie, we needed you on Sunday. So many tyre strategies. So many. I mean, in the sense that Prost, you always used to, win without any kind of, or was often known to win without any kind of drama or anything. And Prost's mantra was always to win at the lowest possible speed. That's not exactly what Oscar Piastri did. Even with the safety car, he pulled out a 15.4 second, almost 16 second advantage to win by the flag. And it was quite a late safety car. So really he had everything sorted. Maybe Lando would have had the same pace, but after a penalty early on and a fight through the field and then, various sort of trying overtakes with everyone, he wasn't really there. And George Russell, battling with various bits going wrong, meant that maybe Oscar could go ahead and win by that margin, but we hardly saw much of him, did we?
No. I mean, that's the thing. And Bertie, when from where you were sitting, Oscar kind of was just cruising it, wasn't he? He was up out front. They just got it perfectly right for Oscar, and Oscar got it perfectly right for himself.
Yeah, Oscar just looked in control from the beginning of the weekend through all the practice sessions, seemed to have, it very nailed on what he was doing in qualifying. Qualifying looked pretty comfortable, very under control. It looked like he was always going to come out on top there. Maybe the margin wasn't as big as we thought it would be from McLaren from P3, but a really stellar race from him. And then I think there was a lot going on. The late safety car, I think, definitely hurt some. I think standout person that hurt was probably Kimi Antonelli, and maybe Ferrari. I think Ferrari could have done better without that late safety car towards the end. They were sort of boxed in what they did on strategy there, but very dominant for Oscar, and it will leave Lando questioning what he could have done better this weekend, how he could have had that car, and straight on to the next one. So not a lot of time to recover.
Well, Andrea Stella said that there's no noise in Oscar's head, which is a very useful characteristic in Formula One. I think it allows him to progress, process information, process what's available in the situations as a way of improving himself at a very fast rate. And that's what's happening, isn't it? I mean, he's all over Lando at the moment. And I just wonder how much that's got into Lando's head. He was like, he was beating himself up. He's flagellating himself after qualifying, wasn't he? He was saying, this is, what was he saying? He's calling himself clueless. He said, it's like I've never driven an F1 car before. And then he has the start issue, which cost him 5 seconds in the race. But nevertheless, it was a very quick start for him. But he probably, but for that, would have finished second. So how much is Oscar living, do you think, in Lando's head at the moment?
I don't know. It's just click. The word for me is of the weekend is clicking. It's not clicking for me at the moment, said Lando, and that sums it up. If it's just not clicking, the car's not to his liking. To be fair to him, apart from in the wet in Australia, he's been pretty consistent about the car not clicking for him, even throughout testing. He was saying he's not really comfortable. He needs to try and find the car in a happy place on the limit. It always surprises him with his driving style. There's, not really anything that he sort of knows is going to cement a pole position. And so we saw that with pole position for Oscar in China, which was the first dry race we had. Both of them missed out in Japan, and then Oscar had it here. So Oscar deserves all the credit for doing the work in qualifying pace, which is the practice that he did over the winter. Maybe he could tell Lewis Hamilton whatever practice it was that he did, because Lewis needs some qualifying practice by his own admission at the moment. And then it's all flowed from there. So yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if you don't already sit on our interactive service and sit on the Oscar onboard and listen to the radio, is to go back onto the internet and find the whole of Oscar's races on team radio. They are amazing to hear. They're incredible to hear how low stress it is and how well he works with Tom Stallard. All the responses are copy, got that, drink's not working. It would be nice if it was working. It's all so low voltage. All right, you could argue, when you're qualifying on pole and then just going away from the race, that's easy for that to happen. But I think that's what Stella means, that there's no noise in Oscar's head.
Tom Stallard, his race engineer, is fairly low voltage himself, isn't he? He's quite a calm character. As we talked about him before, former Olympic silver medalist in the rowing. You can imagine the pair of them. It is just low stress, low voltage, and I compare that to others, Max and GP, and what we've heard from Lewis with Ricardo Adami. They're an interesting pair. They clearly suit each other.
I think they do suit each other. The characters definitely among them, but it allows Oscar the ability to get on with what's important, not get this stressed environment, not be in this frantic position. So when you're trying to put everything together in qualifying, and millimeters and tenths and hundredths of seconds making the difference, everything that you can do to bring down the heart rate to get that working well is positive. I think it's very positive, and they've obviously got a very good relationship. And clearly he does fight back a little bit when he says it would be nice if the drink was working. I'm sure it would be really nice in Bahrain in the heat if it was working. So he's making his point, but not in a very noisy way and not in a very stressed way.
Yeah.
And he, had it not been for the Australia off, he'd be clearly leading the championship by a decent margin now, wouldn't he? Oscar. They only scored 2 points in Australia, and now he's closed down 20 points on Lando in 3 races. So yeah, he is in the ascendancy, as we say.
Yeah.
It's not Oscar in the ascendancy.
Do you think that's the point though, Ted? That they need to, if they get to a point midway through this year, like last year we discussed a lot, having a number one driver, do you think whoever comes out on top points wise from this first 5 or the first flyaway, is that they're going to start to promote one over the other, and they both see it as important to get the points on the board this early in the year?
I don't know, because that would only suggest that there's some kind of extreme external threat from another team. And, George Russell, Max Verstappen, you could argue maybe if they have an amazing next few races, then that might come. But I like to think, as I said to Oscar in China, that it might just sort itself out and we don't have to have any of this sort of, it wasn't papaya rules, was it? That just means don't crash into each other. But any of the favouring one over the other this year, hopefully it will just sort itself out.
Well, actually brings us on to a couple of questions from fans. Kian says, at what point, if ever, do McLaren choose a number 1 and number 2 driver? I can't see them letting Oscar and Lando keep taking points away from each other when George and Max are so close on performance in races, although that does tend to move from race to race, certainly on Max's side of things. And Lewis has asked, is Oscar Piastri slowly starting to become the leader at McLaren? I mean, they're both questions that you kind of alluded to a little bit there, but it's obviously on the fans' minds at the moment, because I'm not sure anyone was expecting as fast a start as we were from Oscar Piastri, apart from perhaps Karun, because Karun's been saying it all along. But it's another level, isn't it? He's definitely on a different plane to how he's been before.
Yeah, I think he's always been very close in qualifying. We've seen many qualifying through the year, but the consistency is the big thing this year, consistently to be there in qualifying. And then, we know that he's been working a lot on his race pace. His first season, that was the thing that was struggling the most, was getting that race performance out of it. And he seems to be, for the 4 events we've had so far, they're now on that. So yes, it's going to be a bit back and forth, but I think Ted's already mentioned it's a really good point. Until they're not in control of both championships, then they don't need to choose a number one driver, as long as they can stop them crashing into each other.
Well, then let's move it on then, shall we, to one of the other teams. Before we come on to George Russell and another great display, nursing those softs for all those laps at the end post the safety car. But a story that is gathering pace, and Ted, that you saw a little bit of evidence of in your notebook afterwards, was what's going on at Red Bull. Now, we understand that they've got a correlation problem with the wind tunnel, and it's moving into race weekends now, and they're sort of struggling and having to do all the data analysis and revolve their setup around data that they're gathering at the track, rather than trusting the stuff that's coming from the wind tunnel and the simulator. And that's, on this occasion, it's affected the balance of the car, the grip of the car, or the grip of the tires, and also Max's braking, which he was complaining about all weekend. He then finishes 6th, which is respectable, bearing in mind the problems that they had with that car. But how deep is the crisis? And what about that argument that we hear about between Raymond Vermeulen, who's Max's manager, and Dr. Helmut Marko after the race?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that was something I saw. And, I've seen plenty of times where Raymond Vermeulen or Jos Verstappen and Christian Horner and Helmut Marko have been discussing situations. But this was particularly, Raymond seemed particularly irked about something, which I think was actually the pit stop problems. And we've got short memories, haven't we, Simon? Not 2 weeks ago, we were saying that Max Verstappen is definitely back in the World Championship, having dominated pretty much, well, maybe not dominated was the word, but his fantastic performance in Japan on pole and winning the Grand Prix. So let's be a bit careful with this. And they would have known, Red Bull would have known from testing that they weren't as quick as the McLarens, and actually not as quick as the Mercedes as well. So there were pretty much no surprises. I think what the Verstappens were annoyed about, what Raymond Vermeulen was annoyed about, and Max said this as well, was that when everything isn't so great on the car, at least we need to have good pit stops and good operational things going wrong. And actually, if you count the slow pit stop that Max had in Japan that put him into conflict with Lando Norris when Lando went on the grass, and then you count out light number 1 not working for Max, light number 2 not working for Yuki, and then front right not working for Max on his second stop in Bahrain, that's 4, for all those I can count, happily I can, and I've got the fingers to help me, that's 4 pit stop problems that Red Bull have had in 2 races. And that's very unusual. Now, of course, cause effect, these things happen. If Jonathan Wheatley was still there, would these things be happening? Probably. The electronics in the pit stop traffic light system don't know that Jonathan Wheatley is now the Sauber team principal and has left. Jonathan Wheatley didn't spend his evenings going and making sure the reprogramming of the traffic light system in the pit stops is working. And it's probably nothing on the front right that Jonathan Wheatley could have done. It's a coincidence. But when things aren't happening like that, and it did cost, Bernie, did you go and have a look? So I thought that Max came out, it did cost Max and Yuki 1 place each. I think I said at the time on the commentary that those slow pit stops. Max was stuck behind Esteban Ocon for a while, and Yuki was stuck behind Isaac Hadjar, although got past him quite quickly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the commentary. I think, just to pick up on one thing, is I'm a bit skeptical about the coincidence. Red Bull used to be the fastest by and far at pit stops. They've sort of moved their focus a bit to consistency over the last few years, which is why we've seen, the McLaren 1.8 in Qatar that we've seen, they've stopped focusing on being faster and faster. So what has changed? So, when I was in China, we'd seen them doing the test in the Ferrari pit stop in post-race. So have they been forced to change something in their system on the traffic lights? Because it's very unusual to have a system for so long that now you've got this traffic light. Generally, teams set this up, test it on Thursday. The car doesn't obviously leave the box then, but you tend to do a live stop on Friday, which would mean that you've fully tested the equipment. Again, you test the equipment as it is on Sunday morning. We see them on Sunday in the pit lane, all the crew with the helmets on, full car in the pit lane. And that test is meant to be nothing's changing from that point into the race. So how did that test not pick up an issue that the first two pit stops had is a question. Now, again, the car doesn't leave the pit stop in that situation, but these systems gather a lot of data that should be fit to do it. So yes, the pit stop system doesn't know that Jonathan Whateley has gone, but is there something that Red Bull have been forced to change in their pit stop equipment that has led to 4 bad pit stops in 2 weeks? Because that's, like you say, highly unusual for Red Bull. Or maybe a crew member's changed. I don't know, but it sounds out to me as being not normal for Red Bull by some stretch. Sorry, this is very pit stop heavy, Simon, but I find it unusual when they come out and said, "Oh, the first pit stop, we just thought the guy pressed his button incorrectly, and then we didn't think anything would be wrong on the second pit stop." Now, maybe it's just the time wasn't enough to check it, but all those checks are possible in the data, or should be possible in the data, for someone to go and look, why did that one go wrong? But
either way, I mean, the thing is, when Jonathan Whateley was in charge, it was 7 years, wasn't it, winning that pit stop prize. This year it's Ferrari, perhaps surprisingly, that are regularly the quickest in the pit stops. But either way, that was just one of the reasons. But to come back to the question that I asked Ted originally, and Ted saying, yes, it is only a week since Suzuka where we saw him being masterful. Is his driving masking a deeper problem, I suppose, is the question I'm asking with regards to Red Bull and to Max Verstappen, because it's obvious from the radio communications, he's actually remained fairly level-headed throughout all of this one. It's just, you understand when they're having meetings so soon afterwards, and it's involving Paul Monahan, it's involving Raymond, it's involving Max, it's involving Dr. Marco and Christian. All of the big cheeses are discussing what's happening here. And there's clearly an issue with the wind tunnel because of the correlation. The new one comes online in 2027, but for the moment, can they address it? And is Spain and the changes to the TDs in Spain going to be as big an effect as they think it is?
After Japan, Christian could have said and put the season into context. What Max did today was absolutely fantastic, given that we're not sure about what we're seeing coming out of our wind tunnel. We think we might have a correlation problem, which they had last year. I remember him saying this to you last year, didn't he, Simon? That we got a correlation problem.
But second half of 2024, but it's reared its head again because they don't feel like they're getting the data. In fact, what Max says was, yes, we tried everything with the car, nothing works. I don't want to hear about how many upgrades are coming or how much of a difference it should make. I just want them to come and we'll see how much it delivers. So I think that's as strong as he's been this year.
Yeah, I did think that, Suzuka was one where Max made the difference that qualifying lap, and then from then on with the race that we had, was able to control it. Jeddah's potentially another track for that, because the qualifying lap's going to be really, really important, and it's about bravery, how close you're going to take it to the walls, control of the car. So, Max is going to be quite difficult there to beat as well. But the correlation issue, if that's the case, has been going on from the middle of last year, not on top of it. You can't be holding on for a new wind tunnel that you're still not sure the correlation of, coming online in 2027. It's a bit far down the line. And, it is, we always have this thing, from an engineering point of view, an engineer will say, this new front wing, we're estimating it's worth half a tenth or a tenth or whatever it is. And it maybe doesn't always deliver exactly that on track. So to pick up on Max's point of he doesn't want to hear what it's worth, there'll always be slight differences in what the wind tunnel says and what happens on track. But the difficulty would be if it's not bringing any improvement, or bringing improvement in the wrong areas, or making the car more nervous or more difficult to drive. All of those things end up in a negative spiral. And if you get into this frantic thing of changing lots of things at once, it's very difficult to figure out actually where the issues are coming then as well. So that is something they need to get on top of pretty quickly if they can.
I wonder if it's something at the rear as well, because Ayumu Iwasa on Friday, free practice one, in Verstappen's car, the car was festooned, Simon. It was festooned with aero rakes, but in really specific areas that I hadn't seen before, like off the rear wheels, and there was one kind of midway in the engine cover, all to the rear. These aero rakes, they weren't. You could easily miss them because they were quite small and thin. But Iwasa was doing a lot of the sort of correlation stuff and the aero measuring in Bahrain. So yeah, that might point to what it is. And maybe Max says, look, I don't want to hear about the upgrades, but they'll have they know their onions at Red Bull. Even with a correlation issue, they'll have an idea saying, okay, well, in the past we've done that and it hasn't actually correlated to that, but it has done this on the other. So they'll have a slightly much of a workaround. They can't be completely in the dark, can they? The car's not that bad.
No, but you just wonder how long this. We talk about the lack of noise in Oscar Piastri's head. I wonder how much noise there is in everybody in Red Bull management and drivers' heads with everything that's going on at the moment. It just feels to me like it can't go on for 3 or 4 more races like this, with Max having to drive around the problems without the question, which is definitely rearing its head in the paddock again, is it not, Ted and Bernie? That availability for 2026, Max will want to be in the best car. Is he going to be patient enough, do you think, to wait to see who is best on track in 2026? Or is he going to go, I'm going with Mercedes, I'm going with Aston Martin. They seem to be the only two in with a run of it. But on that front, and I suppose tying in nicely with this discussion, is George Russell, who then his electronics are going haywire. Brake-by-wire, he's having to, as we understand it, he's having to reset that several times per lap. He presses the radio button and it opens the DRS outside of the DRS zone. And all of this going on, and on soft tyres that he's forced to go on for that last stint, and manages them well, just enough to hold off Lando Norris at the end. Brilliant drive, wasn't it, Bernie, by George? In fact, almost driver of the day. I mean, I know there's Ollie Bearman, there's Oscar Piastri to take credit for, and Lewis Hamilton won it, but I thought it was stellar effort again.
Yeah, really good effort. I think that, that soft tyre final stint really made the race. They had the same sort of options as Ferrari. They could either fit a soft or a hard, and they went for that soft. And then they made it work, and that was a much longer stint than was optimum, definitely. So yeah, I think it worked out really well. And I think there's lots going on in the car. The resets, the reset buttons. Thankfully, Bahrain is a track that there are some straights on, so there is time to do the resets that you need to, because it basically involves pushing a load of buttons on the steering wheel and pressing OK. Just trying to get. And sometimes quite complicated how you get to them in terms of switch position. The DRS one, that is something that doesn't happen that often, but has happened before, where basically the system doesn't know where a car is on track. So it doesn't know the gaps to the car ahead or the car behind, and therefore it can't automatically activate DRS. So it becomes, you have to manually override it. And good foresight to say, I pressed it there accidentally, try and work out on the delta what you've gained, give that up very quickly, gets rid of any penalty at the end. So that's very good foresight to say, right, I've made a mistake there. What can we do to fix it? Try and not have any penalty at the end. So I think that was a really strong drive. And George and Mercedes have sort of been under the radar, not, really pushing laps and qualifying, just getting the laps done, getting the race done. And, George is sitting in a championship position that where, if you just to think of the voice time we give everyone, the amount of time that we speak about these drivers, has gone a little bit under the radar, but it's still like edging away at it.
Yeah, still there or thereabouts. He's 6 points off Max.
Yeah, 63. Car 63 has 63 points, which is a symmetry that I like. Verstappen 69, Piastri 74, Norris 77. So, yeah, I mean, listen, I think George is doing what Mercedes would expect him to do. I mean, I like the way that he, is driving the car and sort of figuring out all of these things. It's like maybe like a dodgy first car that you had that, you knew the engine light used to come on, but you could ignore that. And so I think George is doing what he wants. Will that have an effect on whether they keep with him, Mercedes, or have a question about whether they accept Max Verstappen into their team? I'm afraid to say no. I don't think that will have a bearing. George could be leading the World Championship. Well, all right, maybe that would have a bearing, but Toto will, as we've been saying, will in all likelihood, if he gets the opportunity, sign Verstappen up for the future. And I don't think, such as the unrelentingly cutthroat nature of Formula One, I don't think he would think twice about replacing George Russell or Kimi Antonelli. Listen, he might farm Kimi Antonelli out to Red Bull. You never know. But
I don't know about that. Paul Holland at Paul H66 runs. Can you see Mercedes making another move for Max for 2026? He seems pretty frustrated with the car, and with George out of contract at the end of the year, there is a potential opening. So it's not just me, it's not just you, Ted, it's not just Bernie. It feels like it is a rolling stone, and it is gathering moss.
Yes,
if that's the case. If
Paul runs, I'm sure Paul runs doesn't gather any moss. The only thing I would say against it is that there is how shall we call it? I think a kind of burden of history that might make the Max to Mercedes link kind of less likely than Max to Aston Martin. I know a lot of water's been under the bridge since 2021. I'm not talking about Abu Dhabi. I'm talking about the intense nature of the fight between Mercedes and Red Bull in 2021. The Silverstone accident, where Max and his manager and his dad were furious with Toto Wolff for celebrating, quote, like he'd won the world championship when Lewis won that race, without, they felt, a thought for Max's well-being and a trip to Northampton General. So there has to be, I know there's a lot of water under the bridge since then, but I just feel that there's more of it would be easier culturally in terms of Max's affinity with Adrian Newey to go to Aston Martin than Mercedes. I see that happening more, and hoping that the Honda will be as good as the Mercedes power unit in 2026, but knowing that Aston have Adrian and Mercedes don't.
Everybody's talking about it in the paddock. There's no two ways about it. You go up to people from Dutch media. Some of them are saying, we think it's done already. Others are saying he's in discussions. I mean, look, this is the nature of it. Right? We might as well report what we see, report what we hear. Names will remain anonymous, but there are some that are saying he's going off to Aston Martin. There are some that say, why on earth, when we think that the dynos and the info coming out of Brixworth is that Mercedes is looking really strong for 2026. If you're going to back both of those, Aston Martin are at a phase of their life where they're trying to rebuild with Andy Cowell and Enrico Cardile and of course Adrian Newey, whereas Mercedes are established. They're established as winners. If you're Harry Soden or manager of George Russell, and the way he's performing at the moment, if he does the same at Saudi, you're not banging on Toto's door saying we need to get this contract sorted straight away, because you've got one eye on what's happening at Red Bull and thinking he's not happy there. He can't be happy there the way the car's going at the moment. So is he not going to be looking elsewhere for 2026?
He definitely is. And I was just going to pick up on Ted's point and say that someone of Max's ability and his desire, we see this desire to win, this desire to be the best, to get the world championships. He's not happy unless he's winning races. And I think despite all of the water under the bridge or history, I think he will, I have the impression he'll just go where he thinks is the best chance of winning. Whichever team on paper he thinks has the best chance of winning, I imagine will be his preference. And he'll be fit to put all that other stuff potentially out of the way. But, I don't know the guy. I just based on, that strong desire that we see within him to be winning. And it's going to be a very tight call because we don't have all the information about which engine is going to be best, which chassis is going to be best. It's going to be a very, very difficult call, that one. And if we look at some of the brilliant world championships that we've had, world champions, and some that haven't done so well, a lot of it has come down to this crucial decision of which team to go to. Alonso arguably should have scored more if he'd always chosen the right car. There's other champions that have won world championships because they've been in the right car. So these decisions are crucial to the next world championship that Max can win, I think. And often we put it down to their driving, but very, in history, a lot of the which car you can get into at the right time has made a big difference as well.
Takes me back. I don't know if it takes you back as well, Ted, when we were stood in Monza and Niki Lauda and Toto Wolff had pulled out the stops to convince Lewis Hamilton that Mercedes was the right place to be for the turbo hybrid era, and how well that worked out for them both. It strikes me that now Max Verstappen is in that position whereby everybody up and down the paddock think that he's the best driver, and he's proved it over the last 4 years that he is the man that everybody wants. So does he have that luxury now of the others courting him and saying, okay, we need you for this next period because we know just how good you are?
Yeah, I mean, does he want to continue? Does Max want to continue at all, or has he had enough? I think he does want to continue. B, does he think that Aston Martin is, especially with how low they are at the moment, and they have more of a time to make up, might be too much of an ask for 2026? And C, does he think that even though Mercedes aren't exactly winning races at the moment, it's going to be so power unit dominated that we're just going to have what's the new phrase that's come in? Energy starvation, or there's what was it?
Is it going to be energy? It's going to be an economy formula, isn't it?
Economy formula. Yeah, it's going to be so.
What's going to happen?
Yeah, we're going to be so struggling. The power unit's going to be struggling so much to generate enough electrical energy to use on deployment that they're going to have to be harvesting it, this way, that way, and basically the driver running a hand generator if he could, or a pedalo. There isn't enough ways for the power units in the cars to actually generate the electricity that they're allowed to use on a sort of power boost in the corners. That's why they're afraid that they're going to be harvesting energy on the straights, and so people are going to be just going past them. And if they are, and Mercedes have sorted that out, the gaps are going to be so much different that any Adrian Newey genius in the chassis will be completely negated by having the best power unit and hybrid system and KERS system. So I think that will guide Max's thinking more. So to go back to your question about George Russell's manager, I think Toto might find himself sort of mysteriously unavailable, being in his office all the time.
Just put the gone fishing sign on. Yeah.
Harry comes to the office. Where's Toto? I had a meeting with him. I don't know. I haven't seen him for a while. Toto's like in a cupboard, hiding under the bed.
Exactly. Gone to get some trout. Fish for some trout. Actually, let's digress a little bit. The V10 discussion, right? On Friday, Mohammed bin Sulayem calls the meeting, comes in, they're going to discuss V10 sustainable fuels, as we've just discussed before. All of the drivers thinking, yeah, we'd love a return to that. But obviously they're committed. The teams are for this new formula, 50% IC, 50% coming from the electrical side. You can understand why they're not going to change it immediately. But I think we're all of an opinion in here that it would be great, isn't it? We're not going to electrify the world, right? Formula E is there. That is the racing series that is battery powered and taking people as far as they can, or taking the technology as far as they can in that side of things. What's stopping Formula One, do you think, in the future? Let's look forward to 29. I think John Noble was telling me that's the earliest in which they might be able to bring in the V10s, Bernie. But for the regular fans out there, that would be just the thing, wouldn't it? Sustainable fuels, V8 maybe more likely than V10s because it's got more road relevance.
Yes, it's always easy to say in hindsight, but I think what we should be doing for next year is not changing the engine and just making it sustainable fuel. And sustainable fuel, like, we cannot make everything that we currently use fuel for work on electric. Jet engine is the big one. We need to find a sustainable fuel that we can produce at mass to solve some of the problems that we currently have, to not continue to burn the fuels that we currently are, and not continue to produce greenhouse gas. So I totally on board with the sustainable fuel. And I think the sooner that we get it into F1, and we've been too slow to get it into F1. If we told teams 2 years ago they needed a sustainable fuel to operate at a cost per litre or whatever, they would have done it by now, and we would be 2 years further ahead in the sustainable fuel bandwagon. Other formula are doing it. Other cars are running on it. So we should have pushed the engineers in F1 much harder to just make this happen. And it's been slowed because of trying to do this sort of hybrid power thing. So I am all for it. When you are at a pit lane, when you're in a paddock, and someone runs an old car, a V8, a V10, whatever, it doesn't matter what car it is, it doesn't matter who's driving it, it doesn't matter what time of day and night it is. Most team members are on the pit wall, listening and watching the car go. It's literally down tools. I've left the office, walked across into the pit lane to watch a car go round because we're all ultimately petrol heads and we love it. We love the sound of it. And I just think the sustainable fuel has the power to solve some big, big problems for us, but we need it to be manufactured much, much more cheaply than it is now. And the way to manufacture stuff more cheaply is to get it en masse, which if you've got 10 F1 teams doing it, you definitely are moving in that direction. So I'm all for it. I think it's really exciting. I don't really care what engine it goes in, but I think we should be trying to make those fuels and, like you say, step away a bit from the other solutions because it's not going to be one solution that solves the energy crisis that we have.
Yeah, 100% agree with Bernie. And you know, if there was ever a person who understood the purpose of Formula One and the entertainment value, it's the late great Eddie Jordan, and that was something on his podcast with DC. Do you remember, Simon? He was most vocal about in the last year or so was his revulsion for these power units and the take away the visceral emotion of a naturally aspirated engine and the feeling it gave people and the shock, in fact, that when people would come and sit in the grandstand for the first time or in the viewing banks on general admission and they'd see a car come past and they'd be like, whoa, okay, I get it now. You know, this is what these cars are. They're and all right, you know, it's more family friendly and all the other good reasons, and not only because it's road relevant and some form of electrification, which the manufacturers insist on. But what is Formula One for? What is Formula One for? Formula One is for entertainment, and the sponsors come because there are lots of people watching it because it's entertaining, and then they give the money. Manufacturers will come and go. They have come and they will go in the future. So we can't be beholden to the manufacturers and just do whatever they say, because you never know. We've seen what's happening in the world at the moment. Troubled times, and they can easily just with a strike of one pen just stop the Formula One program or whatever they're doing. So I think EJ was right. I don't know the reasons entirely why Mohammed Ben Sulayem is bringing it up now, just on the eve of a new engine formula, but he's got his reasons. And I think it is, with a sustainable fuel, long term, the right thing to do.
And whilst we're on the subject of things that please us, can we just have a quick word? I really loved seeing Sir Jackie Stewart, the oldest living Formula One world champion, go out in that 1973 championship-winning Tyrrell behind the safety car and getting out, and he wore that helmet signed by all 20 living Formula One drivers, including Michael Schumacher, whose wife, we understand, helped him with the signature for that one. But that was... well, it was just, it was great. It was great to see. It was a lovely moment. And I hope that, I spoke to Jackie on the grid and we saw the helmet up the front. I hope that makes, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, get the right people in the room, auction off that helmet. And with everything that it's, you know, it says about Formula One right now and everything. And obviously Michael's still in everybody's thoughts. That's going to go, if he gets the right room there, that's going to go for an astronomical figure for Race for Dementia, which is such a great cause, Bernie.
And I think, you know, it's fantastic for him to do it. God, can you imagine at that age getting into a car and doing a lap? It must have been great fun. And he has fought very strongly for that cause. And it is great to have voices speaking out, using, you know, all the publicity we have around F1, all of the marketing we have around F1 for good causes, whatever that cause may be. You know, everyone's got something close to their heart. So it's brilliant to see. And I think, you know, that helmet is, you know, it's fantastic to have done it round Bahrain, to have all of the signatures on it, like you say, and the images coming out of it, you know, that is a fantastic collector's piece for someone. Definitely not something I'm going to afford anytime soon, but it is great that they're able to raise that awareness for the cause, and, you know, that they feel their voice is loud enough to do that, because I think it's a really important thing to do.
Yeah, I could hear Jackie Stewart saying, you know, get this safety car out of the way. I don't know why the safety car had to be there, but I suppose it had to be there for some reason. But yeah, it'd be good if he could push it. But yeah, that Tyrrell looked magnificent, didn't it? Yeah, the whole Stewart clan were there and signed by all. Is it 20 the champions?
Yeah, I think it's 20, isn't it? Yeah. So just it was lovely. Every single member of the Stewart clan all there. They're funny. It's like he's obviously the patriarch of the Stewart family, but his sons, they're such a nice family. They're quite often at Formula One races en masse, and it's great to see. They're just right at the heart of the sport, no doubt about that one. All right, time for us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss Ferrari and everything else that happened in Bahrain and look ahead to Jeddah and the third race in this triple header. Quick word on our show partner, Audi. The philosophy of Audi Sport isn't just about winning races. It's about pushing boundaries. Everything learnt on the track goes straight into Audi's road cars, making them just as thrilling as they are refined. Take the Audi RS range, serious performance, but with a level of sophistication and refinement that doesn't need to be loud to make a statement. It's that perfect blend of power and precision wrapped in quiet luxury. Whether it's their powerful style or the RS sports suspension with Quattro all-wheel drive for razor-sharp handling, Audi is constantly redefining the future of performance. Book a test drive today to experience the Audi RS range for yourself. Welcome back to the F1 show, sponsored by Audi. Right, let's get into Ferrari then, and the difference in sentiment, particularly on Lewis Hamilton's side of the garage between Saturday and Sunday. So he had, in Q3, he had his first lap time deleted because of a track limits violation. The second one, he made a mistake, and as a result of that, he was some way off and qualified in ninth. But he turned that round in the race to pick up positions and gain, particularly on the middle stint, Bernie, on those mediums. The strategist, Ravi Jain, decided he was going to go medium, which perplexed a few people. But then both he and Charles started to overtake people, hampered a little bit with the hards at the end. But what Lewis was talking about is saying, look, he's moved brakes, he's using engine braking that he never used at Mercedes. He's just getting used to all the intricacies of this Ferrari. What are we to take into those comments?
Well, I think, we discussed a good bit, maybe at the end of last season, beginning of this season, that it was not going to be easy to step from a Mercedes power car, always having driven Mercedes power unit, into Ferrari. Things will work differently. How the engine braking works, where it comes in, how much brake balance you run, lots of how it regenerates, how it deploys, all of these things, the terminology, it all changes. So it was always going to be difficult to try and get, these guys are driving on such a fine balance. And when we talk about gaps between drivers, we're talking tenths of a second, we're talking very, very small numbers. It's easy to look at the grid and say it's 4, 5, 6, whatever positions it is, but it's generally a very, very small number in real terms. So it is hard to get on top of these cars and just to know instinctively what's going to happen in each corner, what's going to happen when you get a bit of tailwind or a bit of headwind or any of these things that you're trying to deal with in Bahrain. So I think Lewis is getting there. He's adapting to it, but it's only race 4. They're coming thick and fast, but it has only been race 4. I think I actually really thought that the safety car didn't play into Ferrari's hands on Sunday. So Bahrain is a race where overtaking's possible. It's a race where there's high degradation. And what that means is you want to run as even stints as possible. So for a 57 lap race, you're roughly talking 20 laps on each stint, regardless of the tyre. Largely, that's what you're doing. And that's what they did. That first stint, the first medium, they ran much longer than others. I got a bit excited here thinking, oh, maybe they're going to try the one stop. Let's see what happens. Then they fit another medium. I was like, well, that's not going to play out. But in that second stint, only with a few laps different in tyre age, that's enough to start bringing back the positions. And I think that was going to play out even better for them in the final stint had there not been the safety car. So safety car forces everyone onto the same strategy. So their advantage in the middle stint is lost a bit because their middle stint is too short. And they're then, in their opinion, forced onto a hard tyre. So they've got the slowest tyre for the longest stint, which is not what they had planned to do. I think they would have kept extending that medium and maybe put a soft on because the hard wasn't looking great. So I really wish we hadn't had that safety car. We would have really seen that Ferrari strategy play out because I think they would have ended up in much stronger position than they did.
But Bernie, can I counter that with what if George was able to go onto the softs? Why didn't Ferrari take the opportunity to do that? They made it work for them. Everyone was saying, oh, the hards didn't work out for them. Could they not have done that?
I think they could have done the soft in perfect hindsight. I think at the time, and we've discussed it already, that it was a long stint on the soft for George. So obviously was outside of what Ferrari thought was possible. I've also not looked through which tyres they had available. Did George have a better soft than Ferrari had available is one question. But I think in hindsight now they'll think we should have maybe made that soft work. But they had to choose. Ideally at that stop lap you had a medium available. Because Ferrari had ran two
Yeah.
mediums, they didn't have a medium available. The best tyre for that final stint was the medium. So they were choosing between a soft and a hard. And they went the hard direction, which I can see why they did that. But in perfect hindsight, maybe the soft would have been at least initially better and then hold on to the positions. But it was 6 and 2 3s probably a little bit for them.
Yeah. That's why it worked out perfectly for Oscar, wasn't it? Soft, medium, timing of that safety car. Medium was the right one for the final stint.
I think there'll be a big conversation to be had at Ferrari because we heard Leclerc, and I didn't hear all of it fully, but complaining at the first pit stop, why were they not fitting a hard? So if they'd done medium hard, then they would have had a medium available for the final stint. So there'll be a bit of discussion there about when you run medium, you do leave yourself at risk of that safety car in the wrong bit of the race. You know that you have got two extreme options to go to. So there'll be a bit of conversation, but I wish we hadn't had that safety car because their strategy was coming together really well.
Well, it was a bit of a safety car for nothing, wasn't it, Bernie? I mean, Oscar Piastri was very surprised and didn't want to say it, but we will. It's like when I spoke to him afterwards, he was like, "Yeah, then we have that safety car. What was that for? A bit of debris, but it was very much a kind of belt and braces, safety first. Yes, must pick up the debris." It's fair enough. I think the FIA have got their reasons.
They needed a gap, though, didn't they, Ted? The virtual safety car wouldn't have given them the gap to clear the debris, which was right on the racing line, is the excuse that we're hearing. Is that?
Yes, that is fair enough. But to go back to your original question about Lewis Hamilton, at least when he was struggling on qualifying in the Mercedes, he only had half a season left to go with them. He was happy enough to, invite questions is the wrong phrase, but make people think that maybe it wasn't entirely him. Maybe it was the Mercedes setup as well that was working against him and the way they ran the car. He knows now, Lewis, that given that he's got 1 year and 3/4 left on his Ferrari contract, he needs to make this work. So he knows that it's not something that he can just defer until the end of his time with the team. He needs to make this qualifying thing work with a Ferrari. So how you do that, I don't know. I would imagine in an ideal world with unlimited testing, he'd take the car. Bernie, what do you think? He'd take the current car with a whole range of tyres to somewhere like Paul Ricard with huge amounts of runoff, where he can go completely crazy on qualifying laps and on profile corners, different corner profiles, and experiment with stuff on setup as well. That would improve his qualifying. Of course, you can't do that, so you've got to do all your learning in Grand Prix weekends with barriers and walls close by and gravel traps where you don't want to compromise the rest of your weekend. So it's really difficult for Lewis to get on top of that. Can he do it in, an old road car on Bruntingthorpe Airfield? I don't know, but he clearly needs to do something, doesn't he, to work on this, because he doesn't want to hear that he hasn't got it in qualifying anymore. Fred Vasseur doesn't want to hear that he hasn't got any qualifying anymore. The Tifosi don't want to hear that. Ferrari don't want to hear that. So that's the crucial thing for me. The race was no problem. Lewis was great. He was great in the race. Good recovery. P5. I know, bearing what you said with the strategy, Bernie.
Well, I think that probably for Leclerc, he could have gained a position. He could have held on to that position maybe over Norris at the end. So that's probably the position that I'm thinking they could have held on to if they were allowed their strategy to play out fully.
Yeah, so Lewis probably would have ended up still being fifth, and he was much more optimistic. So let's see what happens in Saudi. But Bernie, where would you, if you had to be, performance engineering a driver who had qualifying troubles, how would you do it? What's possible?
Well, I think what you've suggested, a lot of what they're dealing with in qualifying is instinct, the reaction of how you deal with a little snap, how you deal with a bit of brake balance and shooting, like knowing himself how to adjust that through the lap without needing any information coming from the pit wall, getting a feel for, we see them come in and qualify and they change front wing angle as the track improvements come in, how that changes affecting the car. So it is time in the seat. And it's sort of getting to that point of knowing, okay, when I change engine brake in Y1 position, this is the exact effect it's having on the car in a whole range of conditions and a whole range of wind for a whole range of tyres. Simple things like the outlap preparation, getting the tyre in the right working range for Ferrari. And that number will be different across teams. They'll all have different ways that the brake temperatures going into the tyres, for example. So it's really complex to get the car in the right position for turn one of a qualifying lap. And in Bahrain, it's even more difficult because often you don't want the tyre in the right place for turn one. It's often too cold for turn one, but it's in the right position for turn four. So you often have to deal with the first few corners being too cold for the last bit of the track to be exactly right. So it's trying to understand the intricacies of how each of those parameters, and there's loads of them, affect the qualifying balance of the car and get the most out of it, because you're asking these drivers to perform on a knife edge of performance.
Bernie, what Lewis was also saying was that Charles tends to have a setup at the start of the weekend that he largely sticks with. Lewis has been tinkering away and then ends up miles away from him. And that's not necessarily the right way to go. It's just he's having to adjust that driving style to the ends that you're talking about, right?
And they'll get to a position where the team and the background team that's doing simulator work or the simulation before they get to a track on a Friday will start to understand what Lewis needs from the car. So they'll start to know what setups will work for Lewis rather than just the default setup that they're given to Charles.
Okay, let's wrap up the other stories from the weekend then. Bernie, Ted, Alpine, good in testing in Bahrain, vastly different conditions, a lot cooler. But Pierre Gasly, to qualify where he did, got an extra place, started from fourth, finished in seventh, was nonetheless a great return and came out of nowhere because they were the bottom team coming into the weekend. And Jack Doohan outside of the top 10, but again, just flashes of the speed, and perhaps his future is looking a little bit brighter on the evidence. He hasn't scored a point yet still, but we have seen the fact that I think the pit wall and a lot of the senior engineers there think that, there is something there and at times he can take it to Gasly.
Yeah, I think that fantastic result for Gasly to start with that. I wasn't necessarily expecting Alpine to be so up there in qualifying. Maybe I'd sort of missed some of the intricacies of practices, but that was a fantastic result. And you could see the celebration for them to have come into the week. They came into the weekend with no points, right? And then you've ended up in this really, really strong position in Bahrain, and then able to hold on to it through the race. I think, again, they had stopped just before the safety car, made the decision to stay out under the safety car conditions, to extend that hard stint, which was obviously a struggle in that final, but it left them in a position to try and hold on to it, the best track position that they could be. So yeah, I think it was looking really strong for them. They need to understand why Bahrain was strong and how they can bring that into other events. That's the big question mark for them. So is it, the medium speed they're very good at, so it's very one specific speed, and then how can they influence that? Jeddah is a very, very different track.
Didn't we say that the wing clarification for China hurt Alpine the most?
Yeah, that's true.
Do you remember a couple of races ago? And they were woeful in China and slightly better in Japan, although obviously Doohan had that little oopsie. But yeah, now Pierre Gasly. So they've recovered well from the rear wing beefing up the clarification. It was pretty much well thought around the place that it was Alpine who was stretching the grey areas a bit too far. Obviously, it's a bit more standard to what they had in testing, and they were pretty good in testing, but that's great for Pierre Gasly. 6 points puts him ahead of Hülkenberg and Bearman. And bearing in mind, who was it, Simon, on the weekend who said, was it a driver who said, if it's Alpine say that their power unit cost them 0.4 or half a second per lap, then imagine what they'd have with a Mercedes power unit if they were, which they're going to have next year. So that'll be interesting. So something's
one of our pundits, wasn't it? Yeah,
was it?
Yeah, one of our pundits.
So that's going well for Enstone so far. Well done to them. Doohan, you're right. Seems to be a bit happier with him. Some of the heat of the fashion of Colapinto seems to have gone out for various reasons. But also, got to say that you look at that 3 drivers with 6 points in the drivers' championship: Bearman, Hulkenberg, and Gasly. Good weekend for Bearman and for Esteban Ocon. Ocon's now well in the top 10 in the drivers with 14 points, and a cracking result for the Haas team. Another 4 points for Esteban Ocon. So, Alpine and Haas, that's going to be a keen fight in the constructors, I think, for the rest of the year, and Williams as well.
Haas are up to 5th. I mean, aren't they? Yeah, have a look at that.
Ahead of
20
Williams.
points ahead of Williams. Yeah, and actually, I mean, the super early undercut work for Esteban Ocon in that race, and he jumped a few cars on that one. For Jack, he was a little unlucky with the safety car. Jack Doohan was, and then got a 5-second time penalty for track limits violations. But again, yeah, on Ollie Bearman from 20th to 10th, his dad came over the radio. Another story that makes your heart sing, Bernie, to see this young rookie coming in. His dad's following every step of the way, and that was a great drive, and he came over the team radio to say it.
You know, he's been so impressive. It was here last year, or it was Jeddah last year that he first got in the car, and we were super impressed with what he's been doing throughout. So I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and I hope to continue to see many more of those drives.
Did Ollie's reaction not sound to you like, "Dad, get off the radio, I'm at work"?
Yes, it's so embarrassing.
It did sound a bit like that, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, yeah. But they're quite tight. We know that they're another one. They're another family that travel en masse. How long that will be allowed to happen by the team, etc., etc. We've seen families when they first come in. Yeah, brilliant. And then the team says, maybe it's time we just sort of maybe stayed away for a few so we can take control of what's going on. Quick one on Carlos Sainz. DNF for him, running in 6th briefly. They had huge tyre degradation. The Sonoda crash left a hole in his side pod. Actually, retrospectively, weren't they? He was 10-second penalty because the car was to be retired. He was going to get a 3-place grid penalty for Saudi, wasn't he? But then he came in, did his 10-second pit stop, and then went out for another lap, and then retired the car. The stewards hadn't picked up on that. But as a result of it, he's not going to have a 3-place grid penalty for Saudi. I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Bernie?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's one of these sort of anomalies in the rule where it was meant to be, but now we sort of, it was meant to prevent you sort of stopping the car early and then not having the penalty. But now we see people, we've seen it quite often, go out, do the 10-second stop go or whatever it is, then continue and retire the car later. You know, I think the worst, or not the worst, but the most extreme example was Checo leaving the car under the red flag to go and to serve the penalty quite a few races ago. So it's a bit of a strange one, that, but he's got away with it. So no penalty for Jeddah.
And frustration for Albon. I mean, coming robbed in qualifying.
Yeah, 12th place being robbed there. Maybe could have made up some places, but only ahead of him were Bearman and Antonelli, and not by much either. Albon was only the sum total of 1.2 seconds behind off a point for Ollie Bearman at the end of the Grand Prix. So it could have been very different for Alex Albon. Naughty boys corner, Simon, has to go to whoever sets the ride height on the Sauber, because that's we've seen that the stewards and the technical delegates pretty hot on that. So Nico Hulkenberg had pretty much exactly the same rear plank wear and was disqualified as Lewis Hamilton did in China. So bad luck. Didn't miss out on any points, but bad luck. They'll have to sort that out. The other naughty boy corner has to go to Liam Lawson, I'm afraid to say, whose F1 rehabilitation is not going brilliantly, picking up 15 seconds of penalties, which is not good for any professional F1 driver to be picking up. You know, your race time every half a second, Bernie will know this better than anyone, of every half a second of your race time is precious. And to throw away 15 seconds of it, plus the time that it takes to go into the pits, if you had to make an extra stop to serve that, which I don't think he did, I think it was just added to his race time, is not what Liam Lawson is at the races for. And final sympathy for Fernando Alonso, for the two-time world champion, most experienced guy, still yet to score a point. Incredible.
Just final one on spotting. Who spotted? Guess who it was, Bernie? Who spotted the track limit violation on Nico Hülkenberg in qualifying retrospectively? One guess. Who spotted it? It wasn't the automated system from the FIA because they didn't have the camera there at turn 11. But of all the sporting directors up and down the paddock who might have had the eagle eye to have picked up on that, go on. You used to work with him. Any more clues?
Oh, you're going to say it's Andy Stevenson from Austin?
It's Andy Stevenson, the one that in Austria a couple of years ago forced the FIA to look at 1,200 clips of VT and then again retrospectively changed the result of that race and gained Fernando Alonso a magnificent result off the back of it. It was brilliant. Well done, Andy Stevenson. He's a sporting director on top of his game. He just loves onboards, doesn't he, Andy Stevenson? All right, quick one then before we go on Jeddah. Street race, 27 corners, 3 DRS zones. Ted and I will be watching whilst gorging ourselves on Cadbury's Easter eggs and watching you out there with the rest of the team. 100% chance of a safety car on the evidence of the last 4 outings. What's your take on what might happen in Jeddah, Bernie?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very different track to Bahrain. It's going to be much more track position. Qualifying is going to be much more important. Softer compounds than we had last year. So is that going to push it more towards a 2-stop? Pirelli are hoping so, but I think probably still a 1-stop is possible there. Big thing for me is I have the short changeover in Doha that you had last week. So is my suitcase going to make it?
Can we go back to that? Yes, you correctly predicted that wasn't going to happen for me in Japan, and I was with the same underwear for a couple of days until that arrived. So I can only hope that the same problem doesn't befall you, Bernie. So take your first change of clothes in your hand luggage.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to do.
You should. That's the lesson to both of you. You should both be traveling with hand luggage only. Point one, and point two, Bernie. If you are going through Doha Hamad International Airport in Qatar, can I recommend, apart from your Easter egg recommendations, and Simon, other Easter egg brands are available. I like mini eggs myself. The TikTok sensation is Dubai chocolate, Bernie. So I can tell you that Qatar Airport has in stock the Dubai chocolate, which is the chocolate stuffed full of pistachio. Have you been looking for it, Simon? It is the kids.
No, I heard about it.
Apparently, it's a TikTok sensation. You can't get it anywhere.
It is. Is that what you were buying? Did you buy that on the way back when you and Karun disappeared and I went?
No, strangely, I bought it on the way. So this is 2 weeks old. I bought it on the way to Japan, and it's successfully managed to not melt it in my bag through the Bahrain heat. So this is a well-traveled block of Dubai chocolate. It's been to Japan and back.
I had less luck. You know those 10 boxes of Pocky that I bought in Tokyo when we were together, bringing them back for Easter for the kids. Left them in the back of the van whilst Rory McIlroy was winning the Masters on the way to the airport. Sad end to today's F1 show, but hopefully everything will be all right, Bernie, when you arrive in Jeddah. Enjoy the carrot juice.
I will.
No chocolate sticks in the Lazenby household for Easter. You'll just have to do with the normal chocolate. But happy Easter, everybody. Enjoy Saudi, Bernie. And we'll see you for Miami.
Yeah, we'll be back after Saudi to review that. But happy Easter, everybody. Enjoy your weekend, Bernie. We shall be watching with interest. See you later. Bye, everyone.